Uh, Good afternoon, or good evening. Welcome. I'm Lance J. Brown, the co-founder and past president of the Consortium for Sustainable Urbanization. It's my great pleasure to welcome friends and colleagues from around the world to this week's Green Books event, the final event in our 2024 series of discussions with global thought leaders on our progress towards greater, greener cities for all. The program is special because it's on the heels of the WOOF 12 UN Habitat event recently held in Cairo, where a number of events dealt with the increasingly important issues of the public realm and public space. And it's special because Brussels has, for some decades now, been a leader in green cities initiatives. The CSU is pleased to add this Green Book session in pursuit of solutions to our current challenges of sustainability, resilience, and the quality of urban life. As the UN now predicts, the global population will approach 10 billion by mid-century. 10 billion, certainly at least a billion behind anything I ever heard. The public realm will become of increasingly, if not continued critical importance. Of special note for those AIA members in attendance, you must stay for 45 minutes and then you can apply for one learning unit using the self-reporting program
Okay, Larry.
and the learning objectives in the program invitation. For those joining us for the first time, the organizer of this series, the CSU, is devoted to building bridges between the United Nations and civil society, the design professions, the private sector, academia, and allied organizations. The CSU mission ranges from increasing awareness, facilitating knowledge of transfer, and fostering connections, cooperation, and collaboration, while all the time promoting the United Nations 17 development goals, the SDGs, especially Goal 11 on cities and communities, as well as the new urban agenda. In the spirit of collaboration, we want to make sure that we thank all of today's program partners, especially the UN Habitat Office, the AIA New York chapter, the UN Habitat Professional Forum, the NGO Committee on Sustainable Development New York, Columbia University Center for Buildings, Infrastructure, and Public Space, the Creative Exchange Lab, and Global Urban Development. I invite you all to visit the CSU website, see our resources, our publications, and check our upcoming Green Cities events. Now, with great pleasure, I welcome and introduce today's speaker, Yannick Van Helen. Yannick is an architect, urbanist, and partner at ORG, a New York and Brussels-based office that focuses on solving complex projects across scales to address the many social and environmental crises of our time. Yannick leads ORG's complex multi-staker public space mobility infrastructure and urbanism projects, including transforming the highway entrance to Brussels into an urban boulevard, the plan for the Brussels Canal area, and the public space manual he'll discuss today. Before joining ORG, Yannick combined academic work with a writing career and practice. He graduated magna cum laude from the Faculty of Architecture at l'Encambre in Brussels. On a more personal note, last summer I had the good fortune of spending some time in Brussels, a city I first visited in 1961 and not since. Much of the historic center remained as marvelous as I recalled, but as I walked across the city, I was greatly impressed with the changes made since and the general high quality and humanism of the urban environment. As some in the audience may recall, my 2014 AIA New York presidential theme was civic spirit, civic vision. I have an abiding interest in the role of the public realm, public space. There is some noise. Somebody has to mute themselves, please. I have an abiding interest in the role of the public realm and public space and how it serves so many of our fundamental human needs and activities. I also had the great opportunity and privilege of touring parts of the city with Yannick and May. Both online, benefiting from their expert insights and visiting some of their commendable projects. So I now look forward to hearing more about what they are doing, their explorations in the design of the public realm. I hope that there will be many questions and comments. Please use the chat function to submit your questions and comments, and we'll do our best to reply, time permitting, to as many as we can. So I now give.
I think you muted yourself, Lance, just before finishing.
Okay, there I am. I now give the floor to the screen to Yannick Verhalen, and I'm sorry if I left out anything. All I'll add, if it was too soon, is if you have comments or questions, please enter them in the chat, and we will do our very best to reply to everyone as best we can.
Thank you very much, Lance, for the introduction, and thanks for everyone for being here. It's a great honor to be here as part of the Consortium for Sustainable Urbanization series, and it's a great opportunity to present our work today. So as you know, today we will address public space and how we can design more sustainable, vibrant public spaces in our cities based on our work on the public space manual that we did for the Brussels capital region. Before that, I just wanted to quickly introduce our company, ORG. So as Lance said, we are based in New York and Brussels. I'm talking from Brussels today, and we are mainly focusing on solving complex projects and driving transformation because, as was said again, also transformation is clearly necessary as we are facing many challenges across the board, and we need our project to have a positive impact on our societies. In order to realize those transformative projects, we believe, and that's how we work also, that three pillars are necessary. So, of course, we have the spatial expertise with design and planning thinking as designers, architects, and urbanists that we are. But we also need more and more the technical expertise, and more we are using also advanced analytics to help the decision-making process by analyzing large amounts of data and evaluating scenarios to make sure that we can reach consensus and base our vision on factual information. And then if we want transformative projects, we also need to take care of the social pillar and to have expertise in process and implementation management so that we can at the same time get feedbacks from the users, inhabitants, and stakeholders, but also guarantee in a way that those transformative projects, they have a large base of support so that they get realized at the end. And that's with this kind of approach and this kind of spirit that we are working on complex infrastructure projects in Europe, like the capping of the Ring of Antwerp, where so it's the second largest city of Belgium, and where we are curating the studies to put most of the ring underground, making ways for more qualitative public space, new green spaces to mitigate noise and pollution, and to also pave the ways for more sustainable modes of transportation. And considering the massive scale of that infrastructure project, which aims also at linking the city center with its suburbs, it also has a big impact on the city. And it's, for example, a project where we did massive stakeholder management, massive participation process to make sure that we get feedbacks on our ideas, on our designs from the users, but also we get a large base of support so that we can actually get this necessary project realized in Antwerp. Another kind of project that maybe illustrates more this idea of advanced analytics is this model shift project we are also doing around Antwerp, which aims to basically reduce the use of the car, so the model use of cars to 50%, and for which we developed a specific and custom-made computational model to help us evaluate and assess potential investment project in infrastructure to make sure that we can make the right choices to get to that result of diminishing the modal shift of cars. And so the end result is a report that illustrates how the different infrastructure projects like tram lines, new bike routes or bus routes can have impact towards reaching that goal, and which investments should get more priority than others because they are more successful, let's say, in getting to that modal shift. But so it's just to illustrate the kind of projects we do that really aims to have a transformative impact that also will take time to get realized. And that's why we also think of our project as like cathedral project that takes more than one generation to get realized, but that we also need if we want to go to a more sustainable urbanization. And that's also the kind of project of the public space manual that I will focus my talk today. So it's also in the framework of the green books, and actually the cover of the manual is also green. So that makes perfect sense. So it's a manual that we developed, not alone, but with also Bureau Basmet, with a landscape designer, and with the expertise of various experts in mobility, material reuse, ecosystem, and
You're muted.
Okay, I'm sorry, I apparently muted myself. So as I was saying, and I hope that's where I stopped, the project we did for the public space manual, we did it with Bureau Basmet, with the landscape designers, and with the expertise of many different experts, because you need many different expertise actually to design public space today. And it's a manual that we developed for our client, which is Urban Brussels, which is the public administration that is responsible for everything in regards to urbanism, who is also delivering permits, etc. in Brussels. I will talk a lot about Brussels. So I think it's useful maybe to give you some reference points. So Brussels is the capital of Belgium. It has 1.2 million inhabitants. You see the densities just right on the screen. In size, if you put it in a square, it fits in a square of 16 kilometers by 16 kilometers, which is around 10 miles. It's also a very diverse city with 186 nationalities. And as you can see, the population density is, of course, most dense in the center. But like many US cities, actually, it's also in the center where you have the lesser income inhabitants. So the wealthy citizens, let's say, are mostly living in the suburbs or around the capital city. So today, I want to present a work on the manual. I will first give a kind of executive summary of the manual. What are we talking about? What is the manual? I will then explain a bit what are the key challenges in public space design, and why do we need a manual to help improve the quality of public spaces. And then I will mostly talk about our approach to make this manual and to help achieve qualitative space designs across the board, and also based on our 3 pillars that we want to integrate into our approach. So what is the manual? At the end, today, it's basically a web tool that you can access, and that present you with the map of all of the public spaces in Brussels, and where you can click on the public space that you want to redesign, and it will tell you everything you need to know in order to redesign it. So it will tell you what is the main vocation, what is the main programming of that public space. It will propose you directly typical solutions specific to the width of the street and of its programming. So it's different for every street. It will also tell you which are the key considerations that you need to take into account into your design because of the location of that street into particular territorial systems. For example, it has a slope, and so you need to be aware that there is a big slope if you want to make a bike lane, for example, or it's next to a school, or those kinds of things. It will also provide you with an integrated toolbox with practical tools to help you design your public space. And it will also refer you to the general ambitions and recommendations of the region across different themes, which I will explain now briefly. But so basically, we wanted to make something very easy to use for helping both the professionals who have to design public space in Brussels to get the right information from the get-go, and also for public administration to check whether the permits they have to deliver, whether they fit the criteria, whether they address the right challenges and meet the quality level that is expected. So what are the general ambitions and recommendations of the manual? It has 5 big themes: environment and climate, resources, mobility, image, uses. And for each of them, we give recommendations and guidelines, and we refer to the policies and strategic and regulatory documents that people should know when they design public spaces. Of course, in terms of environment and climate, the goal is to make sure that actually Brussels can be and stay or become resilient and healthy by really reconsidering natural spaces as integral and connected part of urban spaces. So to reintroduce green space and qualitative green space into public space to help mitigate the many negative consequences of climate change. So the heat island effect, the floods, the carbon emission, the biodiversity, etc., etc. And so for each of those ambitions, we give specific recommendation on how to create rich and complex ecosystems in your city, in your street design, in your public space, how to integrate sustainable nature drainage system to reduce the risk of floods, how to choose the materials you are using so that it has less negative effects on the environment, etc., etc. So that's for the environment and climate. We have the same kind of ambitions and listing about the quality of life. So how to make sure that your public space is adaptable, where everybody feel represented, how they can guarantee safety and inclusion, promote social cohesion, while providing services and amenities for all of the inhabitants and users of the city. We also have ambitions about identity or placemaking, because it's an integral part also of urban design. How those diverse and the people visiting Brussels will notice that, but in Brussels there is a very strong diversity, let's say, in morphology and identities, how they can still be expressed in cities, in your public space design, how you can make sure that the public space help having a positive identification for inhabitants to be happy to live where they live, and also how to treat things like heritage buildings or heritage public spaces into new redesigns. And then lastly, but also very important, how we can make sure that the city maintains its productivity. So cities are places where we create value. In order to create value, we need to integrate a lot of networks. We need to have access, and how to make sure that all of those networks guarantee, in a way, the smooth operation of businesses, and also bring the diverse groups of people together. So how to share the space between different modes of transport, so that everybody feels safe and can go about his business in the city. How can we make sure that sustainability is also economic? It's not only about climate or about social cohesion. So that's a very quick let's say, presentation of the content of the manual, I will now explain a bit why, in a way, we need that manual. What are the key challenges in public space design? The first thing for us, or the first challenge that we see when we have to design public space is, in a way, this addition of function or of needs. Public space, it needs to accommodate a lot of different functions in a very constrained space. So you have, of course, the movement function, so the ability to move and access the city. You need the place function, so the ability to sit, to enjoy, to stand, play, exercise, gather, participate, to even consume, in a way, what makes society and cities also worth living in. You need inclusivity, the ability to be yourself, to feel safe and relate to others, particularly in a city as diverse as in Brussels, where you have many different cultures. You need, of course, this function of climate regulation and of ecosystems, just to be able to survive, to be healthy, and to support and develop biodiversity. And then this ambition or this function of placemaking, identity, and legibility, so to be able to read and recognize your environment. And then, lastly, but again, not least, the aspect of logistic and utilities, so the ability to support a productive city. And Brussels is, in that sense, also a very mixed-use city, where we have also urban industries in the middle of the city, and they need, for example, to be able to be accessed by trucks and all of those kind of stuff. And so all of those function, they need to find space. They need space to be able to function in a constrained space. And Brussels, the public spaces in Brussels are also limited in space. So when you look at all of the streets and the width of all the streets in Brussels, actually 75% of them are between 7 and 18 meters, so between 23 feet and 60 feet for people from the US, which is not very wide to answer, let's say, all of those function and challenges, and we need to. So that's, in a way, the first challenge. It's this addition of function of need, and it's actually getting worse because the spatial demands are or have been growing. For example, in terms of movement, we have more and more modes of transportation, and it's an addition. So there is not one mode of transportation that is replacing another one. We are just adding different modes. So of course we have the walking, but now we have steps, we have bikes, scooters, cars, trucks. They all require space. What's more is that we also have seen an increase of size of vehicles. So it's even more challenging. In the same space, you can actually fit less stuff than you were able to. And then, of course, some necessities need more space today than yesterday, because we realize also if we want a sustainable development, we need to give them space. For example, climate regulation. If you want to really create ecosystems that work, if you want to create spaces that can infiltrate the water and avoid floods and those kind of stuff, you actually need space for that. More than you used to need just to have this aesthetic approach of a lane planted with trees. So this addition of function is primarily, I mean, the biggest challenge. It's how do we divide the space for the different function that we need to have in the city. The second challenge is that we have many agencies that are involved in public space. And so when you need to decide on this space allocation, you need actually to agree with a lot of different stakeholders who all have oversight responsibilities or interests to defend, and of course are kind of fighting for their space, for their own stuff. And so, for example, that's the list of stakeholders that were in the board of the Public Space Manual. You have people from city planning, environment, mobility, public transport, parking, security, maintenance, patrimony, tourism, networks and utilities, business association, citizen association, mobility association, and political representative. And it illustrates the fact that public space is actually a thing where everybody has an interest in. And so you need to be able to agree with all of those stakeholders to agree on a potential redesign, and that takes time and efforts. What's more, and that's the third challenge, is that most of those stakeholders, they also have their own regulations, policies, or norms that they want to enforce in the public space. Some are even contradictory. And so, for example, we listed all of the regulations and norms, reference documents that you actually need to know in order to design public spaces in Brussels, and we came up to 167. So, of course, it requires a lot of time to discuss, to integrate, and to agree on which norms and which regulations we are enforcing or not on this particular public space, depending on which functions we want to integrate. And so, I mean, you see those three challenges, the addition of functions, the many stakeholders, and the addition of policies, which is key challenges that you need to overcome in a way to make qualitative public space. Of course, in Brussels, we have many successful qualitative public spaces designs. It's not like, as Lance said, we are trying to be very qualitative, but it's mostly for those kind of emblematic public spaces or during urban renewal operations. And it's only touching a very small part of all of the public spaces you need to transform if you want your city to be more sustainable. So, for example, this is a map showing, let's say, all of the specific or emblematic public spaces in green and all of the generic or everyday public spaces in orange red. And clearly, the vast majority of them are those kind of everyday public spaces. And so the question then is how to guarantee basic quality level for those public spaces, because it's clear that the public authorities, they don't have sufficient means to organize competitions and to follow up the design work like they do for those emblematic public spaces, where you organize a competition to select the most qualitative architects, and then you have those kind of integrated process where all of the stakeholders are following the development of the project. It's impossible to do at the scale of the everyday public spaces. For all of those kind of normal everyday public spaces, how can you guarantee the basic level quality? And that's, in a way, the goal of the manual. It's to facilitate all of those questions so that you don't need to ask those questions and you can directly go and design the public spaces, and you're making sure that the level of quality is already integrated from the start, and that public authorities, they don't need to ask for changes all the time to improve the quality to get to a basic level of quality. Of course, there are already many existing guides, manual, and vademecums, but the issue is, or they are too specific to one theme. For example, we have many guidelines on how to design a bike lane, and then a different document to design a bus lane, and then a different document to design sidewalks. But when you group them in one street, they don't fit together. So you need to integrate all of those manuals and guides and vademecums, or they are too abstract, etc. And so, in a way, the goals of the manual is to help the decision-making on space allocation in public space, to answer to this first challenge. It's to build a consensus on which are the priorities and which is the shared vision for the future, so that we don't need to rediscuss every time with all of the many agencies involved what's the goal here on that particular public space. And it's also to integrate and make clear all the relevant norms and regulations so that we don't forget about them. They are integrated, and we don't need to spend a lot of time for designers and also public administration to go look around for them. And it's really about making sure that all of those everyday public spaces, they get this good quality level. Because the recent events, they make it clear that we need a more systematic approach. We have seen with the COVID that actually people want to use public space for other function than just movement. It's part of their daily life. And we have seen, like recently also with the floods in Valencia, that if you want to tackle the climate change and you want to make your public space more resilient, you need a a systemic approach across all of those public space in order to make to mitigate the risk of those kind of effects in your city. And so we really saw the potential for real transformative impact by tackling those public spaces. So it's a question of resiliency, of course. So that's a map, that illustrates the quality of current public spaces in Brussels in regard to three factual data. And that's where also this advanced analytics pillar, let's say, comes in play, where using all of those data, we can make such maps that illustrate, guys, we have an issue, we need really to work on that and to elevate the ambition level so that we can tackle this challenge. Because as you can see, most of the city center, the public space quality is not good enough. There is not enough green spaces. Most of the public space is used for driving with cars, and even the sidewalks are too small. It's also where you can see with science that it's also where heat island effect is the more prominent and where actually the perceived health of people is the worst. And as I told you in the beginning, that's also where most of the lesser incomes families live in. So it's also a question of social justice. You see that in the suburbs, they have more qualitative public space, but in the center, not. And so that's also why we were interested to work on this manual. And what was our approach? It was about using those advanced analytics. It was about making this stakeholder management to agree on a shared vision. And then it was using these spatial design skills to offer concrete solutions. And of course, also practical urban design tools to integrate all of those norms and regulation. So in a way, those three pillars that I explained at the beginning. If we start with this advanced analytics, in a way, Brussels has many qualities, but one of them is also that they are very wealthy in terms of data. They have a lot of data about kind of everything that they aggregate about the city, but they kind of leave them there. So they are kind of thematized and they never cross them. And so we saw a potential by starting to mix them and combine them into finding and illustrating and to making clear actually what are the key parameters that you need to take into account for public space design. For example, if you assemble different maps of different strategies that they have, we can make what we call a filter. It's a map that shows where is priority greening important. So where are the public space where one of your focus should be about greening the public space? Because, for example, you have in red places where we can link big parks or big reserve of biodiversities together to create a network. And that's an official policy, but it's never been implemented into the public space design. Another example is to identify all of the schools and to say all of those public space, they give access to a school. That's also a specific challenge that you need to take into account. Or where are located all of the commercial activities, the neighborhood centers, where you have an intensive use of public space, where people gather, and where you can expect that your design needs to answer different challenges because of this intensive use. Or another example, with topography and analyzing the type of soil you have underneath, where are the public spaces that are part of what we call the valley landscapes, where you know that you will have a challenge for flood management and where you need to create sufficient space for natural, sustainable drainage system to take place in your public space to mitigate this risk. And so all in all, with this advanced analytics, we identified 18 key parameters that are constraints or ambitions that designers, but also authorities, needs to be aware on public space design, and each of those are geo-located, so they are part of a database that you can easily access on this web tool that I showed at the beginning, so that you kind of have the constraints you need to take into account to design your public space. And of course, for each of those, we identify the challenges and we give recommendations and we give specific tools to design them. The next challenge I said was about the many agencies that are involved. And so our answer to that, our approach was to make a process management in order to agree collectively on a shared vision for the future of all of those public spaces. We did that by approaching all of those different teams separately first with all of the stakeholders, so to have workshop about what are the priorities and the ambitions for environment and resources, what are the priorities in terms of mobility, images and use, and gender inclusivity. So it's a lot of meetings with representative of all of the different administrations to talk about those maps that we made, to identify the constraints and ambitions, and to agree on specific ambitions and recommendations that should be part of the manual. And then we did a super workshop where we combined all of those stakeholders and all of those subjects into one, which was really dedicated to, okay, now we've heard all of your ambitions and recommendations for your different teams. What happens if we put them together in one space? We need to make choices. We cannot answer to all of those challenges in some situation because there is not just enough space. So we need to give priority to some of them. And I'm very pleased to say that we were able, through this kind of process management with all of those stakeholders, to come up with agreeing with all of those stakeholders on a territorial and transformative vision, where we identify 6 programming strategies that are introduced really to simplify and clarify the priorities of the different public space of the region. So now when you open this manual, it tells you this public space, its main vocation, it's about green continuities, or it's about centralities. It's clear. That's the main goal of your design, and then you need to integrate all of the rest. But if your design fails to answer to that goal, it's a failure. And so, for example, one of these, those 6 programming strategies, what are they? You have the localities, which are actually the public spaces that don't have to answer to any of those constraints. So they were not present in all of those maps. So it's the places where you can maximize all the general ambitions so that those everyday spaces become amazing for citizens. You have the water city, which are basically the public space that need to answer to this challenge of mitigating the flood risk that I explained. You have the centralities, again, where people gather, where you need to enhance sociability and adapt the design to the mix of function and the different temporalities and intensities of uses. So it's the little neighborhood centers. You have the school environment. So I'm very pleased to say that we decided that this is a priority for the region, to provide for each school a safe, healthy, attractive environment that facilitates social interaction, where you can go and walk with your kid to the door of your school, and you know that you can play around in the public space, that it will not be run over by a car, and those kind of things. And then the question of green continuities, to connect those green spaces with biodiversity value and contribute to creating a network that can support biodiversity in the long run in the city center. And last but not least, in terms of identity and heritage, the heritage axis, which are all of those avenues and big boulevards that are actually structuring the city, that help the legibility of the city, and that need to fulfill their role in urban structure in terms of coherence and clarity to bring at an urban scale. And so, that being said, for each of those design strategies, we also provide everyone who wants to use the manual with design strategies. So concrete design proposals for each of the different width of that street, for each of those programming strategies, we basically make a design of, okay, it could look like this. It doesn't have to, but that's the first stage of designing. It could look like this. And to further enhance the, let's say, acceptability of the manual, we made various case studies illustrating how those concrete solutions, they can be adapted to concrete situations. So for example, this street is a locality in terms of programming. You see today that the quality is not very present. It's mostly dominated by cars with very small sidewalks. And we illustrate simply how you integrate those ambitions and these programming strategies to make this space a vibrant street for the daily use, where car is not dominating, it's a shared space, it's slow traffic, you still keep parking, etc., but you also make space for other uses, for green spaces and benches and the like. Same for the Water City. Again, you wouldn't say that this street is part of a valley landscape. But actually, it sits at the bottom of a valley, and the day we have big rains, it will flood. And so we also provide an example on how we can integrate those ambitions, making space for this sustainable nature drainage system, making sure that you have enough space to accommodate, let's say, and mitigate this flood risk. Same for the centralities, where you see it's much more about the different use. Restaurants that have terraces in the public space, seating areas because you have many people visiting, and delivery zones for the shops. So again, an example of a centrality, a street where many shops and restaurants. Today, again, not a very attractive public space, not very resilient or sustainable, and how we can accommodate and create space for those other functions, green spaces, create actually a better environment for businesses to thrive, because people going to restaurant are not between car parkings, but they are between green spaces, which is still better. You keep parking and you create delivery spaces for the businesses. And the same for school environment, where the basic ambition is to remove all traffic in front of school, if possible. But if not, it's to really push the car as far away as possible from the school entrance to create a front space that can be used for gatherings and for the entrance and getting out of the school. Again, that's an example of a school street. You have 4 trees, that's already something, but it could be much more attractive, much more safe for children and families to go there and also play during the weekend. Lastly, I wanted to show the green continuities, where it's really about creating those patches of green that are interlinked in the public space. Again, that is supposed to be a green continuity if you look at the strategic plans and stuff, but it's really not. But it could be if you apply, let's say, the recommendation and guidelines of the manual. We did the same for the crossroads, so the nodes between different streets, when they come together, what do you do? Again, with examples also and practical examples illustrating the various strategies. And then we also provide the users with a toolbox of practical urban design tools. As you see, there is many of them, again, divided by the different themes: environment, materiality, mobility, identity, and usage. I'm not going to go in detail. I'm just going to show a couple where we give a practical tool about how you can make sure that what you are planting are developing a meaningful ecosystem by making different strata of plantation, so that you have a low vegetation, middle vegetation, and higher vegetation, which also help reducing the need for maintenance. How you can make sure that actually you will reuse the material of the public space in a more circular way. Or how you can make tactical interventions to test possible redesign of streets of potential uses. There are more detailed and developed tools, like, for example, a mobility matrix, which for each street width, we provide them with what should be the priority in terms of modes. Is it for pedestrians, for bikes, for active modes, and for public transport? Integrating the mobility plan that the region developed and in a way mixing it with the width of the street so that it's clear, again, your design should be prioritarily for pedestrian if you're a street that is below 10 meters. That's it. And then you have various options depending on the width and the type of hierarchy in the networks. And then you have also tools that can be put together. So they are part of different teams. But actually, for example, in terms of parking, it's a huge challenge how to diminish the space for parkings and create space for other function. What we recommend in the manual is maybe to work in an evolutive way. So don't try to reduce parking fully from the start because there will be a lot of opposition, but rather make everything ready so that when there is less opposition, you can easily transform what we call a multifunctional strip and accommodate other uses or extend the green. And it works by integrating already in the foundation a continuous root space and fertile soil underneath this strip that can potentially welcome different kind of uses. But when you are already certain that there is the root space and the soil that will be needed for the green development, and that can also help infiltrate the water under the street. So those were a couple of examples of the content of the manual. Maybe to conclude, so for us, this need, in a way, in order to realize transformative projects, to really integrate not only the spatial aspect, but also the technical and the social aspect, to make sure that they can be actually realized and they don't end up by being put on the shelf like many visions. The fact that we are very happy to have been able to work on this manual that has a transformative vision that's based on those advanced analytics, which also, let's say, base the discussions on factual things and help in the decision making, and also help in the user friendly experience, where you basically go to a web page and you click on the public space you want to redesign, and you get everything you need. And maybe to end this talk and start up the question and answer time, to conclude, qualitative public space, it necessitates a very detailed and integrated technical work, because it's all about optimizing space allocation. And that takes efforts, and it's not easily, I mean, you really need to get into it to really start to play with the different elements and make room so that you can create a more sustainable future for your city. And we believe this methodology that we used for this manual can be copied, can be used on many different other situations. And we are, of course, welcoming any opportunities to discuss that. Thank you.
Thank you, Yannick. You know, I have heard you discuss this project briefly before, and I'm once again impressed with the depth and breadth of what has been included. It underscores the unbelievable complexity of what many probably consider a fairly simple act of design in the urban context. And it reminds me, there's a couple of comments I'd like to make. I don't want to use up too much of the time because we have some fairly good questions and comments. But I must say, it always makes me think of the city of Zurich, from which I borrowed a lot during my AIA presidency, and tried to encourage with some success the fact that public space should be the arbiter of everything else that happens in the city. When you talk about all the agencies that are involved, who in fact convenes those agencies and makes sure there's coordination, You could, in New York City, some of it falls to transportation, some to parks, some to planning. Only recently have we appointed someone that has become, if you like, the public space czar, and maybe they will have a greater opportunity to coordinate. There's a couple of questions, one or two that are really quite critical. I think the most might well be, and I think we've discussed this before, is the manual available in English? And if not, when will it be? I know that this is a manual for Brussels, but as I look at it, it seems to me, if not a manual, it's a template for others to create manuals, which may be one of its greatest strengths. And for that, access is critical. I don't know if that's a comment or a question, but I'm going to ask another question, and then you can decide how best to cycle the answers. David Burney asked how you're dealing with the issues of micromobility, something that is affecting life in a extremely detailed way in most cities that I've experienced. I don't know if it's the advent of electronics in all mobility, but the fact is that in New York there are now manuals on not how to deal with them, but at least arraying the extent or variety of micromobility which is existing on the streets. So I'm going to start with a question of how do you deal with micromobility, and then we'll go to what about an English version?
Just to add, Lance, the city council is introducing legislation to register all of the e-bikes and scooters in the city, which is going to be, even if it happens, is going to be very challenging. And whether or not the Department of Transportation, who would be empowered with the enforcement of this, can actually handle it is a big question. So I'm wondering whether Yannick has any experience along those lines.
Yeah. Not to mention the fact that soon we'll have drones that carry people.
Yeah, right.
So it's a challenge also in Brussels. So it's not directly linked to the manual, but so the mobility minister in Brussels decided on specific regulations to tackle the issue of micromobility, specifically on shared micromobility. And the private micromobility, people are supposed to park and use them according to the driving code anyhow. But for the shared micromobility, there is a cap on the numbers of companies and steps that can be in use in Brussels. So it's a limited number of companies that can provide, let's say, their steps. And then they also are enforcing an obligation to park those steps in specifically dedicated spaces in the city. So you have parking spots that are clearly marked for shared mobilities, steps or bikes. And if people fail to park in those spots, they cannot finish their trip. So it's also integrating this kind of very detailed and GIS analytics, let's say, in the system to make sure that there are a bit less of an impediment, let's say, on the quality of the public space. And so, of course, in the manual, we integrate those guidelines and recommendations about those specific parking spots for e-bikes and the like. About the accessibility of the manual in English, I'm very sorry to say that the official languages of the capital region of Brussels is French and Dutch. So the manual is available in those two languages, but we were not able to convince yet our clients that an English version would be beneficial. We are still actively trying to make them change their minds, but maybe it's also an opportunity for funding. I mean, we also believe that it should also be in English available. And it's I saw other question about its accessibility. So it's freely accessible. You don't need any credentials to access it. You need to go to the website of the urban administration, and then there is a link to the various documents of the manual and also the web tool. But it's completely free access and free use, let's say, of the manual in French and in Dutch at the moment. Sorry for that.
I would like to say in my perusal prior and as you presented, the graphics in the manual are so explicit and so compelling that, as I said, I consider this somewhat contextual. It's not just that it's in Brussels, but or in Europe. Contextually, it's somewhat different, but issue-wise, it's quite universal. And that's why I said I didn't think of it only as a manual, but a template where other cities around the world can look at this and as a help for them to devise their own local manual, as you have. Some items are universal, some are not. Some are being addressed in the questions. So someone asked amongst your typology of space, is there discussions for community gardens and different detailed explanations. How do you go about the community engagement? So there are different components of this, some of which again are probably more specific to Brussels, some which open the door via questions to expansion. But I know that I've worked on a number of projects. Some people here are familiar with the New Housing, New Vision competition that resulted in the Via Verde housing project in the Bronx, where many people thought, we said it was supposed to be a replicable project supported by the AA New York chapter. Some said it wasn't, but I knew that hundreds, if not many hundreds, had visited and been inspired by the idea as well as the details. And so my view of this work is the whole idea of the extent and importance and profundity of developing a robust public space program is encapsulated in the manual and visible by visual inspection. Maybe that's because I'm a visually oriented person. I'm looking, there was another question raised about can the parameters be updated after interventions have been applied, considering impact or future changes, perhaps what we consider post-occupancy evaluation.
Yes, that's a very good point, and I didn't say it in my explanation, but one of the key idea also of using those advanced analytics and those GIS integrated solution is that it can actually be updated rather easily. So we also made a plugin for the administration so that they can update all of the maps every 6 months, every year, depending on when they want, if the situation changes. So, for example, if there is a new policy about those green continuities to change the layout of them, they can just update it and it will automatically change all of the maps of the manual, and the web tool then will be updated. And so it also works then for the diagnostic, let's say, that we did for the public space at the beginning, if you refer to that. So yes, in a way, it can be used to check the advancement or the implementation of the program in the future.
By the way, in the comments, for those of you who have your chat live, there is an invitation to some masterclass working sessions in January, where I guess what has been discussed in general can now might be seen a little bit more in detail. And as I said, this is a quite complex offering. So I would say it's worth that follow-up. I see we're coming to the end of our session. We have a minute or two. I'm not sure if I've included all the questions that were asked. There are questions on parking. I know some of these are universal. I must say one of the images you provided that I thought was quite compelling was the image of the change of the size of cars over time, and therefore basically the contest, the competition for surface space. I don't know where Brussels falls in this, but from previous research, my recollection is that in informal communities around the world, whether they be in South Africa or in South America, that the amount of open space rarely exceeds 5 to 7% of the city's area. Where in more planned cities like New York, it can be up to 35%. So the competition for this space and the proprietary aspects are quite complex. And I thought that aspect, your discussion, your roundtable, was quite good. I don't know this again how one elevates that when you're involved in a car culture rather than a public transit culture. I think that's a longer discussion, and I assume it's well developed in the manual. But if you want to say something about that, and if you want to share any concluding comments, now would be a good time because we try to keep to our time.
So regarding the increased size of vehicles, it's a challenge that the administration is not really tackling frontally. Basically, the idea is to keep the current parking sizes as it is, so 2 meters wide and not more, hoping that it will basically lower the ability of people with larger car to park, and then softly promoting smaller cars. But yeah, no, for me that's yeah, it's a difficult question. But yeah, but to come back on this on the idea of reusing the same methodology for other contexts, that's I mean that's clearly also one of our goals. That's we learned so many things doing this manual that we believe now that we have a methodology that can indeed be applied on other territories, and we are very open to discussing this with any actors who would want. We see indeed that it's a clear need that cities have to transform their public spaces, and yeah, we have tools that can help, and we want to share them.
Two comments again from me. I'm going to go over time a little bit. One, in the chat area, many questions that were raised were answered by colleagues, and I would suggest for those who raised questions unanswered, they read through the chat before we concluded. And I see a hand raised by David Stein. I also see that he's muted. David, do you want to share a comment, a last comment?
Go ahead, Arthur.
I recommend the speaker for including water and soil, because usually when you do design, it's really the water and soil is a new issue. But if we want to look at the sustainable areas from ecological point of view, we should include the other habitats of the city. There are birds, there are animals, and we found out that they are moving from the wild area into the city because they can find more food, more control, and because you don't destroy it with poison like you have in the countryside. And that will add a lot. And so that's one thing that I think we should think about. And another one is in the street, you have the facade of the building and the roof of the building. And these are very, very important because they add to the attractiveness of the central area.
I would give the floor to Yannick and see if he'd like to respond to that. Good points. I think some certainly are included in the canal work, but the biodiversity. Yannick, to you.
No, indeed, there are good points, and that's why we emphasize so much the need to change also the way we plant in cities, to have different strata of plantation, because they answer to different needs of different species that are indeed colonizing, if we can say that, more and more city centers. And yeah, that's the goal in a way, to integrate also those aspects. So to see ecosystems not only for humans, but also for many all species, the values of them, not only for humans. Yes.
So now I'm going to take the opportunity of thanking you once again, very sincerely. Take the opportunity of thanking everyone for joining us today. the opportunity to wish you all season's greetings, a happy new year. I give a little shout out to Jerry Maltz, who's not with us today, who's never missed a Green Cities program, but I'd like to, in memoriam, mention his name, and look forward to having you join us for our upcoming programs, all of which are announced on our website, csu.global. Yannick, I can't thank you enough.
No, thank you. And thank you all for your attendance and your questions.
Okay, we're out. Thank you.